The idea of there physically being some sort of secret knowledge, as in a noun, came about after men realized what efforts, as in a verb, are necessary to discover same. In other words, once it became obvious that to getting where you had to walk there, men came up with the concept of destinations. Not that far removed, by the way, from their slapping of the notion of the mind onto the brain. One man cried, "My God, I'm coming apart." "Don't you wish," replied life. Obviously not your run-of-the-mill man or life. The final two entries in the musical competition were one entitled, "It's the Singer, Not the Song," and the other, "It's the Song, Not the Singer." And after lengthy, indecisive debate, it was decided that the winner would be determined on the basis of a 7-year world war. One man devised a method to help drag himself out of his internal daze and vague herd existence. His approach was to try, no matter what else was mentally taking place, to try and always hold in his mind the letter K. But as time passed and his experience in failure and some success in this effort increased, he began to ponder whether the real importance of what he had undertaken was in actually thinking of the letter or in remembering that he intended to. And this, as abstruse as may first strike, ultimately led him to an expanded understanding of the limits and dexterity of the mind's operations. Distinct from how it is here, on one world things are arranged so that it is the less conscious who are able to see and understand the lives of the more conscious, and in their instance, feel truly sorry for them. Note, all of those who do not want to think about this should not do so. But, meanwhile, back on earth, one man declared, "I feel like I'm on drugs." And someone asked him, "How can you tell?" "I can't," he replied. Right back here on earth. A man stood on a high mountaintop and cried out to all of creation, I am not understood." And life, in the guise of a wise man, walked up and said, "Get yourself laid and loved and face up to the fact that that's the most and best you can hope for." Upon later reflection, the man was thankful that at least the admonition said, "the most and best you can hope for." There is a myth which says that after one man died and went to the big house, the first thing he did was ask the big guy why hormones had picked up such a bad rep back on earth. And the big guy just chuckled and walked away, shaking his head. Once upon a time was a man who, after long and deep reflection, said to himself, "What if I go to all the trouble to die and it doesn't turn out to be worthwhile?" The two final contestants in the philosophical tournament were one entitled, "Nature Furnishes the Surprises, It's the Mind That Must Make Sense of Them," versus the other one known as, "Nature is predictable, it's the mind you have to watch out for." And after extensive, though inconclusive discussion, it was decided that the winner would be selected on the basis of a swimsuit competition. Men turn their eyes from the sun and brusque reality on the same reason that they search for intelligence in their leaders. A boy in a merry-go-round said to his father, "I don't want the ride to ever end." "Then don't look for the end," he was told. At another level, by the way, should one ever exist, the treatment for any psychological ill will be glasses. I don't see too well, said one man. Good boy, said life. And one man told the train, I can wait this out as long as you can. There is another myth which says that, although men forget it just before they're born, life gives each a choice. They can come forth either full of hopes, full of awareness, or full of shit. There is a codicil to one version of this story which says that the choices were actually just two in number, since two of the three are, in fact, the same thing. One man so advised his son, lest you let your sarcasm become undeservedly ecumenical, remember that all passions have their limits, such as, while you can give vent to your insouciant sentiments via such an expression as, who gives a rat's ass? Note its lack of universality, the exception to the rhetorical proclamation being, a rat who has no ass. Later that day, the lad marveled afresh at how near the old man's notes sometimes came to not only making sense, but extraordinarily so. Just as satire is not satire if it is not understood, neither is info. Legend tells of one world in which a creature who learned the secret told everybody what it was, and the place fell apart. Aren't you glad that's just a legend? Though coevally, aren't you sad that it must thus be? For fish to believe in immortality and freedom of will would require their presumption that they can outlive water. A landlubber elucibrated it could perhaps become worthwhile if the zoologists ever take over religion. And that dead man at the big house, mentioned in an earlier story, is still wandering about, wrestling with his question regarding the public decline of Harmon's reputation. One man told Life, don't patronize me. And Life replied, oh, so you're ready to die. Fact, there simply aren't that many sane people who see much funny about life, which seems to be why it's fallen on me to present such humorous scenes. Oh, and one more fact. What the hell was all that bullshit just then about it's fallen on me to present blah, blah, blah? There is a difference between being conscious and knowing all about being conscious. A distinction missed most by those who know all about it. Question, how can you tell that someone doesn't fully understand what they know? That's correct. They continue to talk and talk and talk about it. Is this why you seldom see this mentioned in brochures for mystical schools? Is this why what? That's what I just asked. The speaker so discoursed the crowd. From the one came the many, from the simple came the complex, from hormones came neurons, from events came states, from states events, and from nothing came the mind. What more must I tell you? And one man left feeling as though he had indeed been discoursed royally. The most profitable aspect of guilt and shame is in the time they consume. And as regards their mental existence, the best use the ordinary generally make of life is to take them that much closer to death. It's simple, and everybody knows it. The way to keep reality at bay is to criticize it. And if you've never thought of this before, at least save yourself some embarrassment and don't mention it. One man said, "God, but I seem to feel dizzier and dizzier all the time." And a friend replied, "Well, no wonder. Look where you spend your life." Regardless of the standard view of meteorology, there is a fog available to man which is inexhaustible, not to mention circular. The definitive example of avian sanity are the birds who believe that they can change the wind. One day one man exclaimed, "There's this stuff oozing out of all my pores." And life assured him, just ignore it. If he'd gone to a mystic with this, imagine the response he'd have gotten. According to one adult fairy tale, the most common feeling of those who accidentally experience actual moments of consciousness is, "If this is freedom, then let me out." An alert man should think of and treat life with the same degree of tenderness and solicitude that a smitten swain does his smiter. In one ancient record, mysticism is defined as a bloodless lobotomy unaffecting mental faculties. And as always, if you don't like it, don't think about it. And finally, compared to artists, the more awakened cannot take on a patron, for in their mind they find one already demanding a pernicious servility. Why it is that the few's idea of freedom differs from everyone else's. More things I bet no one's ever pondered. All right, I know they haven't. And although it may sound like I'm talking about one thing, you know better. Throughout history, and up until today, those in the arts, those of the arts that make an impact on history from any ordinary view, are, without exception, have been and are benefit of a patron. This is no secret thus far, but you can see it as being a non-artistic rule rather than thinking of the numbers of cases that you know that. But as everyone knows, all the way from Mozart's in music to Leonardo's in painting, those in philosophy, throughout history, you have had the kinds of men who end up in positions of wealth and power, as though they were, if you want to think of them as separate. Those that you have a Mozart who will, if he's going to become a Mozart, that is, have any kind of impact without us being involved with any critique one way or the other of the output of any particular artist. But the point is, for someone to have that kind of time, besides the talent, they end up with a prince. Or Leonardo ends up with a pope. They end up with a patron. They end up with someone out in the ordinary world who has ascended or taken a position of external power. It is, and it still goes on today, although it's normally now under less publicly visible specific connections between one artist and one patron, although that still goes on. But now you have grants, you have all sorts of living stipends and awards given from foundations and etc. But you still have the arrangement of artists based upon the fact that life still makes men collectively look at the arts as being worthy of some collective support, some public support. Whew. You have always had a Leonardo with a pope, with a patron, and a Mozart with a patron, or a Bach. Some person who has a physical, ground level position of authority. It could have been a general, it could be someone who seized political power, it could be someone who had inherited the wealth of the land in a certain area and has a hereditary title now of prince or baron or whatnot, and he has enough people subservient to him on a fiscal basis that he has that sort of power. Almost without exception, also, people in such positions, given just a general, damn near middle class, middle of the parade wiring, they will, at least by middle age, have a kind of non-understood realization that it was not their intelligence, surprise, surprise, that put them in their position. Them having either seized it by the end of a gun barrel or at the end of their family tree. That they either inherited the title and the wealth and the position, or else they seized it through force. And so, if they have any sort of anything resembling ordinary intelligence, their hormones begin to run down, they hit middle age, and it seems as though they just almost as a rule they'll go, also understanding that they've got no talent. That even their most loyal ass kisser has to finally, when he keeps painting, keeps drawing, it just seems to come, or he plays music. And for years and years, everybody in court goes, oh, my, my, my. And he finally realized everybody's got their ears stuffed full of little corn shucks. That we're assuming, again, that the man or woman is sane enough that they finally come to the stage that they realize, I cannot draw, I cannot paint, I cannot write poetry that makes any sense, I cannot write music. And it seems to be, if you wanted to use psychological terminology, which I don't know why you would, but when I brought it up, it strikes me as there now is a clinical classification. I don't know the technical name, but they are now, in popular parlance, they're calling it, whatever the hell it is. It's what comes when you leave the script at home. Well, they call it fear of undeserved success. It's something like that. I believe they got a shorter term, but it's people now expressing the fact that they ended up making $1 million, they ended up being head of a company, or they wrote a bestseller and got richer and better known than they ever imagined. And then they took up shoplifting. They began to shave their head, cut their wrist. And it comes out that now the new description is that they had feelings. After this, they began to think that they did not deserve, that they were a sham, that was just a fluke. They did not deserve the fame and recognition, and that any day now people are either going to catch them or else they've caught themselves. That they don't deserve what they got. You know, bad old me, you know, bad person. Just showing that that is now still available, still going on. But on a wider range is what I'm talking about the patrons of the arts. This is not the reason, but if you're going to look at it in those kind of psychological terms, it is as though that a prince so-and-so, a head of the church, a cardinal, somewhere, somebody with authority, and no talent, and just damn little intelligence in the sense of mental intelligence. They certainly have got to be at a kind of hormonal survival level. They have to be intelligent and clever, either to seize the power that they did seize, or else to hold on to that which they may have inherited. So there's no doubt that they've got to have a kind of Joseph Stalin intelligence to smile and wave at crowds and not hesitate to, and know when to, kill off just limitless numbers of people that they might oppose me. I don't like their looks. There are too many of them. Kill half of them. They've got to have that kind of intelligence. But the patrons of the arts, they see it as that they have sort of merged with a Mozart. That if it were not for my money, were it not for my patronage, were it not for my solicitude, were it not for my generosity with Herr Mozart, he would not be where he is today. And it's very common, of course. People know everybody, even artists. On a good day, they understand what's what in the ordinary world. And so a Mozart has to periodically, when a prince says something like, damn near my son, my little Mozart, and he says something maybe not crude enough, but just what I did about, I'm so happy I could have been of service to you. I'm so happy that I came along when you were in such dire straits. I'm so happy that I had the privilege of being able to help you to where you are now. And any good Mozart, he knows what's going on. He has to go, oh yes, thank you, thank you, sir. At least in front of somebody. It has never been noted out of all of this, and that's not an attack on it, that's simply the way it is, and it is a rule. It's just always been true. From all sorts of views, by the way. You could also look at it as those who seem to have been born, or those who are born with who are apparently born with talent. The Mozarts seem to have consistent difficulty in making a living. The more talented one appears to be at the ordinary level, the more difficult it seems to be for them to hold down a 9-to-5er. For them to pay their bills. They end up with somebody not only having to give them money for their bills, but normally pay them for them, remind them that, once a month, you owe something on your ox cart notes are due every month. Your carriage note. That's still not the reason, but I just want you to understand this is a rule. It is still going on. Just normally speaking, unless it is the most popular of arts. Today you'd call it, I guess, rock and roll would be the most obvious one. It has to be something that has an immediacy, an immediate appeal to a large number of people. So we can call it popular music if you want to. But other than those kinds of examples, and there's always been little bits, like maybe a Charles Dickens within the framework of the literary world in general. If it was someone like a Dickens who was making a living week to week by publishing the stories that are now taken as his books, that they were installments, that he was making a living on the spot, that he could do something. He could write out chapter 2 of Oliver Twist, and people would go buy the newspaper in which it was published and pay money right then, and the paper pay him. That's what I mean by popular. It's not my criticism of the art, whatever it is. But other than that, and it's always been limited, other than that, artists, as a rule, cannot make a living off the public. They need a patron. The arts would not have survived from one level had it not been for patronage of those with plenty of extra funds available. What I told you that no one has ever considered is this. From one quite real valid view, what is the ultimate in art? Mysticism. In the full sense of the word. Why has there never been patronage of the mystical arts? I'm not talking about the occult arts and some king hiring an astrologer. I'm talking about the real, those attempting to explore in themselves and to expand consciousness, to become. Are you getting as, I ask rhetorically, are you about ready for me to stop saying more conscious and finally just go ahead and say those who would like to be conscious? Nobody, well, that's hard to remember because your mind goes, well, it'll start filling in. It'll go, well, he means more conscious. Well, okay. It's up to you. If you can understand it, you do, and if you don't, you complain, and so screw it. Why has there been no patronage of mysticism, of the great transcendental effort, of the mystical quest? Why has there been none of that? Why is there no records, to pick out the obvious, well-known ones? Why is there no record of a prince showing up with Buddha, Lao, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and saying, by God, and they don't have to understand any more than the prince did to underwrite Mozart, because he could listen to Mozart, or we could move up to Wagner and think about how musical tastes were in general then. You could say what a leap it took for the first prince to underwrite Wagner after having grown up with Beethoven and good music. It was just a joke. Couldn't resist it. It was just a small joke. The point being that there's always been, I'm suggesting to you, that the patrons, the requirement for a patron for a particular artist was never based upon the understanding or the comprehension of the patron for the artist's output. So it did not mean that the prince who, for a long period of time, for half of his life, let's say, underwrote a Buxtehude or a Bach or a Mozart. It doesn't mean that he did it on the basis of that he heard Mozart's music and went, oh my God, shh, write that man a blank check and tell him to come over here. It's not that. So what I'm trying to tell you is it does not require any sort of understanding in the sense of real appreciation, but any understanding of what is going on. So therefore you cannot immediately dismiss out of hand my question of why has there been no record of attempted, or patronage, before we get to attempted, but no record of patronage with those in the transcendental arts. Why is it? Does everybody want to think about it a second? Are you ready to conclude that it was never attempted just because there's no record of it? Are you ready to immediately jump to the conclusion that, well, you obviously, if you're as well read as I am, God, tell me you are. 2 jokes in one night, and both of them like Dumbo being shot with a tranquilizer gun. Get up, boy, get up. Got 4 legs. I started to say 5 legs, but that should be a third joke, and then I have to go, oh, actually, no, 4 legs. And you've got to know that there is no record. There is no part of the official canons of any of those major religions I was speaking of. There is no official history of someone coming to Jesus and saying, boy, I really like what I've been hearing about you, and I've heard what you said. And back, come over here and you stay with me, and you don't have to get out there and ride asses up and down the highway and go to people's houses begging. Come on, hey, come over here, and I'll become your patron. We all know that there are no official records of that. But my intermediate question was, are you therefore ready to immediately conclude that it never happened? Can you imagine it? I mean, it's not impossible to imagine it, that someone go. Again, not necessarily understanding, but just a guy. Some guy hanging around there, and among the Jewish population of the time, some guy that's racked up some money, or whoever's taken over, whoever was the straw boss under the Romans of the time, some guy with power, some guy with money. And as I said, as always, their intelligence normally falls somewhere within the classification of a pinhead. That he doesn't have to have understood anything that Jesus was talking about. He just simply, he finds out that there's a nobody. Because it's always got to be a nobody. One prince cannot become the patron of another prince, even though the other prince may be as clapper-headed as he is and is devoid of talent. But it has to be somebody who looks around, and there is a guy walking the streets in sandals, bad hair, a nobody. I mean, he's never heard of it, so he's got to be a nobody. But then he starts hearing this guy shows up, and all kinds of people come to hear him and stand around and they leave. He's becoming an artist. Maybe the Elton John of our day. A popular somebody. So it is not inconceivable, I'm suggesting to you, to imagine someone in a position of power, contemporaneous with Jesus, same place, to hear about it and send out word like, would you come over here and maybe talk to me? I've heard some of your, second-handedly, I received some info about some of the things you're talking about, and it strikes me as very interesting. Would you please come have dinner with me? Be my guest. Bring a date. and then to try to say, well, listen, let him talk through dinner for a while, and then say, well, that's just astounding. I have never heard anything like that. Of course, he checks with his yes man, like, have I ever heard anything like that? Has anybody talking? They go. So he goes, well, I have pondered this deeply. He looks at his yes man. They go, yeah, you have. He goes, yes, I have. And it strikes me as so promising. It's so extraordinary. It would be my honor, be my privilege to become your patron. I can put you up a place here and give you a little money to live on, and I'll give you a better forum. Maybe I'll build you a little theater, a place to where you can go talk. You don't have to keep wandering around out there in the streets and hanging around the riffraff. Of course, he knows that Jesus is riffraff. But he says you no longer have to be ordinary riffraff. You can be my riffraff. So you can imagine it happening. It's not inconceivable. Then there's still the other question is, all right, it's obviously conceivable. Then why have you never heard of it, or why did it not come to pass? assuming that the record would show it. Now, I don't know how they could have hidden it, but why did it not come to pass? Why is there no patronage? Let me point a couple of things before I point out the real obvious. One is, as opposed to artists, those struggling, the more alert, the more awakened, those that have actually done a little something with it, cannot afford a patron or receive, are not involved with patronage. And it's for a simple reason, one of them, but the simple one I gave in the news item was, for in their own mind, they already find that which is demanding of pernicious servility. Is it doing better now? That those involved with this cannot afford or do not get involved with patronage because in their own mind. I tried it with gestures because I know the sentence can be taken two ways, but come on, folks, you got to take it the right way. For in their own mind they find, that is, they find up here, they find that already demanding of pernicious servility. Meaningless ass-kissing. And you do know what it is they find in their mind that demands that, don't you? Certainly you do. They find their mind. Who needs a patron once you begin to understand anything? Who needs a patron? I assume I laid on that one little bit enough. You do understand that if you take somebody's patronage, no matter what they say, no matter, even if they said nothing. I was going to say, even the prince says, all right, to Mozart, you come over here, I am now your patron, I'm your guardian, nobody fools with you, you're under my protection. Here, you can have this wing of the castle, you can have the rooms 114 to 122 for you and your family. All your meals are free, you get 270 guilders a week. You know, the only thing I ask is, like, once a week, would you, I started to say just play, but could you maybe write us a small little piece to perform to me and my friends on Saturday afternoon? Could you do that? And it sounds harmless enough because you assume Mozart, the output, since I chose him, his output anyway, Jesus, he can go to the bathroom. You know, while he's in there, instead of reading a magazine, he comes out with a new sonata. So it doesn't seem like a big deal, so surely, you know, Mozart goes, well, sure, I'll do that. And the prince says, well, good. And he says, oh, and maybe on my wife's birthday, could you write like a longer piece? Mozart says, okay. He said, oh, and by the way, anytime you appear, if you go out of town, would you take this little placard that says, Amadeus Wolfgang Mozart, as patronized by Prince so-and-so. Would you just sit up next to the piano? Someone goes, okay. All right. You understand? You've got to do something except for this. What I was going to point out, those of you that are getting good, even if the prince did not enumerate what he did tit for tat, you all know that even if the prince says, come and let me be your patron, let me take the burdens of everyday existence off of you so that you can create this unbelievable, extraordinary art that is Mozartian. I ask for nothing except that you continue to give this beauty to the world. That's all. And he says another word. Anybody, I don't know whether Mozart, yeah, surely he did. Everybody understands that once you're given something, even if they never say what the conditions are, you know their conditions. And even if the prince had no conditions in mind, I don't mean that was a fraud he was attempting to perpetrate, that he truly at the time says, I expect nothing other than you continue to give the world your best to turn out this inspiring music. That's all I ask, which is nothing for me personally. And he meant it, let's say at the time. But you do know that is not the way life operates. It has nothing to do with human psychology. It has to do with the laws of physics and mathematics. You cannot take anything and not have to be under a conditional strain. One way or the other, you have got to give back another news item tonight that says the more alert would think of and treat life with the same sort of tenderness, care, and solicitude that a smitten swain would his smiter. That a smitten, a dazed, enthralled lover, the same sort, a more alert person would give that kind of attitude, that would be the way he would think, to speak. That's the way he would treat life, all of life, with that same degree of solicitude, always trying to be concerned. The same sort that a absolute dumbstruck lover would give to the beloved. I agree with you. I don't find that to be as metaphysically deep, at least metaphysically striking, as the smitten swain would his smiter. But it's a matter of taste, I guess. I mean, it's a matter of whether you agree with me or you got no taste. So. Well, 1 out of 4. Does everyone understands? You at one time did. Most people seem to forget it very shortly, perhaps after their first love episode. But especially men. Women understand it, but it's the way I do. The verbal context in which I put it would probably be more familiar to men, but as if you are going to hold on to a kind of romantic relationship, past just being laid, there's now the fact, as ordinary people call it, being loved in some way, that if you truly intend to hold it together, and you're going to individually, you take some personal responsibility for its cohesive endurance, then you know, or you should know, at one time you had some fleeting glimpse of it. I guess I'm giving people too much credit. But it's to not start treating the other person with crude familiarity. In fact, it should be a dearth of familiarity, of criticizing the other person. The kinds of, just the normal things that happen. Let's say that you were living together, and or whatever, and you began to start the things like, put the top back on the toothpaste. Why do you always leave dirty dishes in the sink? This kind of crap is driving me crazy. Putting on a little weight, aren't you? If you have any sense at one time in your life, if you were indeed a smitten swain, you at one time had some glimmering of a notion that that was the way to treat your beloved, this woman with which you had the extreme horns. Don't start, even if she's putting on a few pounds, you do not just casually go around and suddenly slap her on the ass and go, getting a little chubby, aren't you? Now, that may not be the end of the relationship, but you are asking for it, to start treating someone with that lack of concern. Assuming that you understand she is not going to take it as a humorous remark. She is not going to take it good-naturedly. We'll assume that she is putting on weight. Or whatever the complaint is. The way to hold on, to take your best shot, just under ordinary conditions, to hold together a relationship in which a swain is smitten, is for him to treat she who smited him, she who smote him, to treat her with extreme care, consideration, and solicitude. Don't be crude, don't be familiar, don't even be critical. I mean, if you have to for some reason, I'm not going to start trying to make up, but if you had to, you can be critical of somebody without them actually knowing it. You can make it sound as though what it should have been, or what you were intending to be, to sound as though it is my heartfelt concern for your welfare is the only reason I bring this up. It's not criticism. Now, God says, man, don't you just hate it when he goes, now, and glances at the clock. Especially glances at the clock, and you know we've only got a few minutes left. But he says now as though he's going to take all of this and in just a few minutes round it up and make it just make absolute perfect sense. No, you don't. No, you don't. I just said that. You don't feel that way, or you don't belong listening to this. But now, can you see any connection between, I guess, those three main subjects? About that there, those struggling with this kind of quest for consciousness never have patronage. And that is because that those who indeed are actively involved with it come to discover that they already have their demeaning, unreasonable patron already demanding. Their subservience, their kowtowing. And it's right here. What the hell does somebody struggling to do this? What the hell does a loud need for someone else to be driving him crazy? That he has to go in and shuffle his feet and say, yes, sir, yes, sir. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Who needs that? And that's a rhetorical question. If you're actually struggling with this, to say who needs anything, whatever the subject is, all that means is run for your life. Because with an ordinary person, they can say, well, who needs it? If you didn't catch the connection between one of the news items of a father advising his son about the fact that you could express your insouciant or even dismissive sentiments toward life by going, hey, who gives a rat's ass? You can do that, but you need to keep in mind that there are limitations to the expressions of all passion. In this case, there is an exception. It is not universal. To go, well, hey, who gives a rat's ass? To treat certain things in life. Yeah, well, you can treat the whole idea of life. Well, why to do good? You're going to die. No, you try your best and then you die. Screw it. Now, who gives a rat's ass? The father said, you can say that and even speak with what seems to be some authority. That is, that you actually expressing something that you feel is real and valid. But notice, it does not go any further than you. That's not the way he put it. He said, notice that even the most heartfelt expressions, sentiments, the expressions of sentiment, of passion, have their limits. In this case, to go, well, hey, who gives a rat's ass? There's a glaring exception. A rat who has no ass. You don't see the connection? I was asking for the general connection, though. Do you see the opening one and the fact that someone actually who is involved with this, to the point that they now understand they have been somewhat, as another recent news item, a soldier to the front lines who returned after he had seen the enemy, finally, up close, face to face, eye to eyeball, and he came back from the lines and said that at this time he didn't actually have anything further to say about who the enemy might be. So someone actively involved with this, by that I mean they have been somewhere at the front lines. They do not need a patron. Once you understand the patron amounts to one thing. Some news source demanding of pernicious servility. And if you're struggling for consciousness, and you already realize, I spend more time kowtowing, bowing down, kissing the floor, flinging my head down, yes sir, yes sir, oh yeah. Oh. Of course, you don't look at it that way. Now, I don't know why you don't, but I know how most people would look. I know how most people probably understand it or be able to swallow it easier is if you can say, well, yeah, it doesn't make much sense to say, I don't go around to my mind going, yes sir, and bowing down and going kissing its ring. I don't do that. I mean, you're making some kind of metaphorical statement, obviously, because I don't do that. I don't have that kind of relationship to my mind. Of course, that already tells me all I need to know about the person, but maybe this sounds a little bit better, that you do not, maybe that's not the way you care to think about it, but look at it this way. Where do you waste or spend? Oh, speaking about consciousness, where do you spend and or waste, let's say 99% of your time? In the mind. I knew you'd get it. Does that sound better? Do you feel better? Rather than saying, well, it's a demanding force, or a force demanding of your pernicious servility, your meaningless ass-kissing and kowtowing. If that sounds too strong, then I'd put it the other way. If that sounds people want to resist, well, that's not my relationship with mine. Okay. Then where do you spend 99% of your conscious energy? And they can answer or not answer. The answer is in my mind. Of course, then they can say, but that doesn't mean it's just pernicious or meaningless kowtowing. Again, you've told me all I need to know. In other words, living in your mind as it is 99% of the time has made you what you are today by God. I mean, had it not been for that, you would not have reached the heights of awareness and understanding that you have now, right? Of course, by then, if anybody had any sense, they might begin to suspect there is a parody going on here. There is a burlesque taking place, not only perhaps right before my eyes, but perhaps directed between my eyes. But as I noted in another news item, satire is not satire if it's not understood. At the ordinary level, none of you ever thought about it, it's irrelevant, but many, a would-be satirist at the ordinary level, to their great grief, have that lesson too late learned. To write satire out at the city level, parody, burlesque, and they throw it out in the marketplace. They present it in song, theater, literature, and they are immediately subjected to antagonism, or under the right conditions, imprisonment, beating, on the basis that no one understood, no one took it, at least those to whom it was directed, or those that he thought would be an audience for. You understand, we're laughing at the folly of certain common beliefs. And they found out, too late, to their own grievance, that no one understood it was funny. And there's even something else, way off the subject, but as you would say, what else is new? There is a greater potential price to pay by doing satire that's not understood than just direct criticism. That is, for a man to walk out to the king, to the local tyrant, to the pope, and to just criticize and say, boy, you're too mean on the people. You just because you took power, just because you inherited from your father, just because you went up there, it doesn't mean you're better than we are. It doesn't mean you're smarter than we are. In fact, I don't think you are. I doubt that you are smarter than us. A king, a tyrant, they can stand a little of that. It's up to them. They may not, but at least they might just send somebody to tell you to shut up. But you write something that appears to be a story about a frog who found himself on this lily pad in the middle of a pond, and it goes into something about how he fouled the pond and how all the worms and the snails and the slugs begin to laugh at him, and it becomes a popular fairy tale. And one day somebody points out to the king, maybe they have a few drinks, he says, do you know that the people are saying that that's actually about you and it's not a fairy tale about frogs? And friends, if you're the one who wrote that satire, as opposed to if you had just publicly, directly gone to him and gone, I don't think you're all that smart. Let us say that the king would have told you, somebody hit that man 3 times with a big stick. You can live through that. But if he catches on, well, I shouldn't say catch on, but you understand. If it comes out that you do it in a parabolic way, which is what satire, of course, and burlesque and parody, that you take something that people are taking seriously. Of course, you can always look at it as being them, because who takes anything more seriously than themselves? But satire not understood is not satire. And it can be extremely dangerous. I'll leave it to you to figure out why, as opposed to just criticism. You remember where we were? The third thing I was asking if you could tie it all together was that someone should treat life. Because you understand that all these examples I've been using tonight and always, it sounds as though we're speaking of kings or tyrants, or how little is the possibility of humans in general to sense satire. And I don't mean just for the sake that the satirist, I'm giving them some additional credit, that the satirist is not just being hostile and aggressive, which they normally are, but that even the reader, disregarding what could have been the kind of motivation inherent in the writer's writing of the satire, is that a good reader, you can ignore, if you have any understanding, You can ignore whatever the purpose was, the intent of the author. But a satire at times, the reason that it's been so useful and is so common amongst those involved with things mystical, to speak in parables, is not just to be obscure, but if you speak on one level about something, or in one way, if you start talking about frogs, and all the kinds of crap I pull out about trains and this and that, of course then if you do it enough, the parables become everyday reality, and then you're done for. Then you have to change. But at any rate, if you can understand it, if you begin to have your own understanding of how the human mind operates and the dynamics and the purpose of language therein, then why parables, metaphors, have been the constant currency of those involved with the struggle for consciousness, is it requires the listener's participation to get anything out of it. Because you hear the story. Once upon a time there was a frog who inherited the center spot on the biggest lily pad in a pond. And you got some ability, that you got some understanding about life on your own. It doesn't matter how smart the author was. But if you heard something like that, and I'm just going to give you credit, people like you should be, that you immediately got some suspicion. However you would think about it. I can't stop here. It's not worth me trying to describe it in detail. But you already, just non-verbally, it's like you internally shift and you understand that you're trying to now listen, not about backyard zoology, not about reptilian hierarchies of power in a pond. You begin to, that you know even if you don't know what it is, but you begin to, if I was doing it, you'd probably think, well, that means that's like the center of a man's intelligence. That's like his own sense of what his mind is. But it could be all kinds of things. But it requires that you participate some, rather than just passively sit there and take the ideas into your head, even though they may seem interesting or even informative. To use a parable about something else, it requires to some degree, and it may not be that much, but to some degree, if you're going to get anything out of it, of any potential extraordinary nature, it requires that you participate in some way, at least enough to begin to translate frog into at least a man. I mean, that's the obvious one of a fable, is like, well, he's not talking about frogs. Aesop wasn't talking about foxes and grapes. He was talking about, all right, humans. Maybe humans and food, humans and achievement, I don't know. But you got to go that far. And that's just the crudest. So, back to what I was going to say. For you to treat life, for you to think of life, for your attitude toward life, and by that I mean everything that apparently is external to you, and the kinds of examples we use of kings, writers, satire, everything that apparently happens in life, you should treat it with the greatest tenderness. You should not become familiar. You should not be bad-mouthing to yourself life, which is the basis, by the way, of it comes out at a very crude level, is that if you're going to be truly a religious person, you should not harbor hostility toward your fellow man. Not just be able to stop overtly from a Hindu cursing a Buddhist or a Jew cursing a Muslim, is internally. If you're really going to be religious, whatever the true payoff for being spiritual would be, is that internally you should not be bad-mouthing. You should not be even commenting in a negative way on other people, even if you don't understand it, even if they're of a different religion, even if they oppose your religion, even if they apparently, as Jesus would say, if they art thy enemy. You should keep your hands off of them. Don't think about them. Don't argue with them. Don't return hostility, even internally, to their hostility. They may be giving you overt hostility. Every time they pass your house, they holler, you damn old Jew, you Hindu, you Italian, whatever it is. And you naturally, your own mind just goes, well, you damn Greek, screw you too, or whatever it is. That's where it comes from, is don't do that. They say, well, because God said not to. I'm telling you why. It will destroy you ever understanding life. Another news item, one in the night, that said it's simple. Everybody knows it, how to do it. They just don't ever think about it. And that is to keep reality at bay. To keep reality out of your life. Another way to say, to cut down the possibility of ever becoming conscious. Like it's an accident that could happen to you. But everybody understands unwittingly. Everybody understands how to keep awakening away from you. Keep reality at bay. Simple. Criticize it. That's all it takes. That is not how a smitten swain would treat she who smote him. And you should be not necessarily in love with life. I know it sounds strong at the end of it. But hey, if it wasn't for life, we wouldn't be here. Of course, you could go, well, who gives a rat's ass? But we've been through that. If you have any suspicion, any hope to make something out of life, other than what another news item pointed out, that the ordinary, normally, the best use they make of life is just to get them that much closer to death. God, you look old, and really, you look like you're about death's door. And most people, they're not up to singing, they think, well, thank God, really? But if you're not into that mode, then you have got to have some feeling for life. It doesn't have to be this kind of, smiley face that, oh boy, I love life. It's not that. But you cannot be critical of life. You cannot be familiar with life. And what I was going to get to, which obviously I won't get to, is take all the thing about patronage. Take all the thing about not becoming familiar to life, because an artist cannot become familiar to his patron. You can't start manhandling your patron. You insult your patron once, twice, or mention his wife putting on weight. Do that more than once. Mozart's back on the street. He's back in the pool hall. Look at all of that, and of course you knew when I said where I was going to take it. Look at it inside of your own mind, all this taking place, and then look at it as ordinary thinking versus this kind of stuff. The kind of information, the kind of thinking you should do, not just information you get from me or somewhere else, but the way that the intellect can be used. And once you find that, it naturally is solicitous to life. It is naturally non-critical of life. And it naturally also is immune to patronage, because it has no patron. There is nobody to help it. There's nowhere that consciousness, there's nowhere that inchoate, nascent, beginning, consciousness, the germ of consciousness, the germ of being awake. Assume you have it. There is nowhere. There's no church, there's no patron, there is no prince that can nurture that. There is no patronage for it. So why waste your time? There was the answer to me saying, why does it never happen? I started to dwell on it and say, well, we can imagine that Jesus don't want to put up with somebody telling him what to do, or you can't imagine Buddha, somebody that enlightened, to go, even though he could have had a nice place to go and a little salary, and the guy starts saying, well, Buddha, tell me an important thought for the day. and you think, well, a Buddha, he's going to say, later for this shit. Or else, he ain't my kind of Buddha. You can't imagine him putting up that crap. That would be the easy explanation of why you don't ever hear of Moses or somebody having a patron. What if they wanted one? If they thought, damn, I wish I could, quit work and lay around. If they wanted one, too bad. There is none. A would-be mystic, someone more awake, there is no patron. There is no help. But your mind will try and play the same game. Well, it is. But it will play, it's that same relationship of a patron, a would-be patron, demanding pernicious servility. It's already there. And it's that same relationship between what the mind ordinarily thinks and this kind of thing, or what consciousness would be. It's the same sort of relationship. That all get on? Thank you, Jesus.